Okay, so today we talk about two things in PHP, how we handle forms and how we do session management. So first two PHP lectures were kind of focused on the language, and now what we're going to focus on in the next two lectures is the interaction with the client. That's today's lecture, is how we interact with the client. And then the lecture on Thursday is more how we interact with the backend database. But we'll also include, with regular expressions, how we type check information that we get from forms. So if you remember, PHP, the primary way PHP gets its input is not from the console, but from the browser. And the primary way that information comes in from the browser is via a form. If you remember that with a form, you are specifying you're specifying an action. So with every form, you typically specify the name of a script. So when the user hits the submit button on that form, the browser packages up the form data according to some standards set forth by CGI for the Common Gateway Interface. So you often hear the phrase CGI. It stands for Common Gateway Interface, and it is essentially a protocol for communicating information between the browser and the server and the browser. You needn't worry about the technical details in this course. You may get them in a networking course. You may not. IT people would tend to need to know about it. So when you specify a form, you typically specify two important attributes for each widget. One is the name and one is the value. When the browser packages up the form information, what it really is packaging up is these name-value pairs. And it's sending those name-value pairs to the server. Every server-side scripting language, whether it's Perl, PHP, JavaScript, Python, it has some way of converting this name-value pairs into something that's accessible from the server side. So in PHP, what you access is through, if you sent the arguments through get, then you access the form data through the $_ get array, and if you sent them via post, then there's a array called $_ post. So these two arrays are prepared for you automatically. And you use whichever array corresponds to the submission action. To the method that was used for submitting. And you use the name to access the value. So back here, you had name equals skill, value equals beginner. So if for this radio button, the beginner radio button was pressed, then when you would type, say, post skill, then it would return BEG for beginner. Okay, so very simple communication mechanism. Again, the form data is the typical input to the PHP script. Every form presumably calls a different PHP script. So there's no ambiguity as to which form the data originated from. It is, your script is essentially tied to a form. There's generally a one-to-one correspondence between forms and scripts. The one thing you need to be careful about when you you set up your HTML forms is that for checkboxes and for menus, it's important to put square brackets there. For widgets that can have multiple values, you need to put the square brackets. It seems to only be the case for PHP scripts. Perl scripts and Python scripts don't seem to require this. But for PHP scripts, if you don't have that there and the widget has multiple selections, you get the last selection. So in this one, if Alabama, American Samoa, and Arkansas were selected and you omitted these square brackets, then you would get Arkansas, and that would be it. So remember the square brackets. Same thing on the checkboxes. If here every checkbox is different, so each checkbox had a different name, but you're allowed with checkboxes to also give a group of them the same name because you mean for them to be grouped together. So if instead of doing it like this, I'd had checkbox type name equals, say, agree, then you would need, again, to have these square brackets in PHP, or you'd only get the last selection. So that's PHP only, but it's important. So HTML forms, the reason you're doing it is any widget, HTML widget, that can return multiple values you should use square brackets. Okay, so checkboxes and menus in particular for that. Lists would also be like that. Okay, let me kill this because I actually don't want to save this. Okay, so let's say that you had this form and that you then submit it. So once you submit, you would, that's not, I need to log in to show it to you. Okay, so once you do that, you can, here's an example of accessing, this is not accessing that particular one. Which one is that? It's process form. Okay, so you can see that now I'm just echoing back things, and I submitted it using get, so what I'm doing is I'm echoing back stuff from the form using the $_get. One thing that's important is you don't trust the data you get back from the user. So you may have on the web form, I don't have it here, but this web form, let's do it again. Actually, we should just be able to show it. Okay, so for example, here, how would you rate your skills in programming? There's only 4 choices. You might think, okay, the web form is guaranteed there's only 4 possible values, but that's not the case, especially when you're submitting using get. Remember, with get, you can actually call it directly without using the web page. You can just use a URL where you have pairs. So I could just say, as a hacker, skill equals Brad, and that's not one of the 4 choices here. Beginner, intermediate, advanced, and super hacker is. But with get, you can actually just type a URL in, or a web crawler could just issue a URL with its own set of name-value pairs, and that's what you will come in with your form data. So you can't trust that the information you're getting has been properly vetted by the website. The reason you do type checking on the client side is simply to give feedback to the user if they've input something that's invalid. But you have to reperform those checks on the server side to make sure that you haven't been given invalid data. And that's what we'll talk about on Thursday with regular expressions, is how you're able to type check the data you get from the form to ensure that it is the data that you expect. Okay, any questions about forms? It's pretty simple. Okay, yes. All right.
Is the only way to do get and post is by using the server request method, or is there any other type of method to use grab the get and post?
No, so you only can use get or post, and the only way, there is a third array called $_request that gets it from either get or post, but normally the only way you can get the form data is through one of these two arrays.
Oh, I was asking for, that may answer my question, but I know through the Zybooks it was saying _server request method is equal to post. Is that?
Yes, that's equal to post. So now you're using the post method.
Okay. Is that the only way to grab it, by using that request method equal to post?
No. That's automatically set up for you. These arrays are automatically there. You don't have, so I didn't, on this side, I never had to say request method get or anything. I just said $_get. Let me look. I don't remember that part of the Zybook, so I have to go back and look. But basically, in the actions, I'm sorry, not the actions. Up here, there's just two ways, method equals get and method equals post. Okay? Those are the only two ways I know of to submit form data to the server. And then each of those corresponds to either $_get or $_post. That's the only way I know of to transmit form data to the server. Okay? So the one you're saying, since it has post in it, I'm assuming that that's simply a way of calling post to post the information to. Okay. Let me go back. Or we can discuss it after class because I'm not exactly sure what you're referencing. Okay. Other questions? Okay. One other thing before I submit, before I forget, when you hit the submit button for a form, it will reset everything in the form if you're not by default. So if I've selected intermediate and I select 30 plus and I select show up late every day, and then I hit submit, in this case I think it's going to give me, notice what happened. I'm going to do it again. Intermediate, 30 plus, blah, 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 blah. I'll select Alaska, hit submit. What happened? It reset to the so-called factory settings or default values. So when this is really annoying to me when I'm submitting stuff on regular servers. So the way that you avoid that now, why am I doing that when I have it here? No, I don't have it here. That's why I'm doing it. Okay. That's not it. That's not it either. Yep. In fact, your memories may be better than our memories. Okay, so to stop it, there is, when you do the submit button, you can specifically put this particular attribute, onClick equals e.preventDefault. So what that says is when the submit button receives the click event, that it should call this function preventDefault, and that prevents the default behavior from occurring, which is to reset the form to its default values. And that way, any user entered input will stay in those boxes rather than defaulting back to what they originally were. And the E is defined for you by JavaScript. So it's like the this variable in C++. And it's a reference to the event object that was created by that event. So you would add this on click. So if I'll show you, I will add it back here. So here's my submit button right here. I add in on click equals e dot prevent default. Now, when I do stuff, beginner 0 to 10, select Alaska, hit submit the data. Wait, why did that? What am I doing wrong? At default. Why was this working yesterday and now it's going to make a monkey out of me? Saved it. Oh, wait, no, I think it was. Let's just make sure. Okay, intermediate, and let's just hit submit the data. Now it's making a monkey out of me. Okay, I'm going to have to go back because this was working perfectly when I was preparing my notes, and now it is not working perfectly for me. So I will check out why it was working so perfectly when I was doing it, and now it's not working perfectly at all. Yep. Okay. At any rate, it's supposed to be that if you add this particular blurb, that is supposed to prevent the default behavior. So I have to see why it's not working. Okay. So moving on to session management, second part of today's lecture. So when you're dealing with a website, you often want to maintain state information as the user navigates through your website. So if they're going through a multi-page or multi-step process to check out, so they've browsed your site, they've selected some things, put it into a shopping cart, now they're checking out, they're entering some credit card information, next screen is supposed to show their address, maybe the next screen is their billing address, final screen is a verification screen. They're walking through several pages. And during that time, you want to maintain what we call state information. Like if they enter stuff in the shopping cart, you need to remember that by the time they have entered all their credit card information. In a normal program, that's fine. You don't have you have variables and they retain information to the end of the program. That's not true with web programming. So this is where everything breaks down and makes things tough. With web programming, okay, if you do nothing, state information disappears as soon as the script ends. So you have these different forms that you're entering. So it's like the user goes through form 1, then they go to form 2, then they go to form 3. And during all this time, you want to be maintaining session information. But the problem is, any information associated with form 1 gets lost as soon as the PHP script associated with form 1 ends. But you somehow have to keep that information around so that by the time you get to the finish, you still have the information from form 1 and form 2. Okay? So there's 4 different ways that have been devised for doing session management. 2 you can do it either on the client side or you can do it on the server side. Okay, the two on the client side are cookies and hidden form elements. And on the server side, it is, for PHP at least, it is their version of sessions, or you can use a database. Now, more recent stuff, there's some more recent stuff that uses some kind of web-based storage. So if you're looking on Firefox and you go to their storage inspector, you'll see cookies, you'll see IndexedDB, and local storage sessions. No, there's another one. It's IndexedDB, and there's one other one that's escaping my mind. At any rate, there's now kind of more sophisticated ways of doing things than cookies, but they're kind of all loosely grouped as using cookies. So what I'm going to talk about is cookies, and I'm not going to talk about the IndexedDB way of storing things. Yes. Mm-hmm. It's the same thing. Whether you write a cookie in Perl or whether you write a cookie in PHP, they'll be stored in the same way on the browser. Okay? So we'll get to what a cookie is, and it's always stored in the same way on the browser, regardless of which server-side language created it. Same thing with Python. Okay? Okay, so I'm actually going to go this point to the handy dandy notes. Not there. Okay, so in PHP, if you want to use a cookie, there is a command called setCookie, and you give it a key. So in this case, that key is whatever is username. Then this is the value, and then you give it a time to expiration. And those are the three main things that are associated with a cookie: is the key name, the value name, and the time to expiration. So in this case, it's 86,400 seconds to expiration. And that's how long you request the cookie be maintained on the browser. Now, if the browser is willing to accept the cookie, the browser will store it and associate it with this particular web address. So right now, web.eecs.utk.edu has, on my Firefox browser, if I executed the set cookie, would have this cookie on it. Username with dknuth as the value, and it would expire, I think this was set to expire in a day. Yes, 86,400 seconds is the number of seconds in a day. So after one day, the browser would be free to purge this. So cookies are stored in your local memory on the laptop or on your phone or on your tablet. So cookies are making use of client-side storage. And the browser can purge this data at any time. So many clients have a limit on how much storage they'll allocate to cookies. Makes sense, right? You don't want sites pigging or taking use of your storage for nefarious purposes or the like. So there's normally a limit on how much storage is allocated to cookies. And if they need to make room for it, then they will deallocate this cookie before even this time limit has passed. Okay, then there are some other things that are a bit more obscure and I'm not really going to worry about in this course. So you can limit the availability to certain directories on your site, so that if you're Amazon, you might have certain directories that can access this cookie and some other directories that can access other cookies. Same thing, you can create subdomains so that only certain subdomains in your system can access it. You can specify whether the cookie can be sent through a normal unsecure connection or through a secure connection. I'm not hugely concerned about that in this course. What I'm really concerned with is cookies are essentially key value pairs with a expiration. And in PHP, the way you create a cookie on the browser side is with the set cookie command. Also, the set cookie command has to be cookie information has to be placed in the header for the document that is being sent to the user. So when you create a cookie, what happens is that cookie is placed into the header for the HTML page that you're sending to the browser. And therefore, you have to call setCookie before you start creating any part of that web page. So your setCookies need to precede, so all setCookie calls must precede any HTML content creation. So they go at the top of your PHP script. That way they go into the header. So once you call setCookie, that will generate, or PHP will generate something that will be sent in the header for that document, basically using CGI protocols. And it will go to the browser. The browser will set up a cookie. Now, what happens thereafter is when you hit submit, that cookie information is sent back to the server. So essentially what it looks like is that initially the server sends a page, an HTML page with cookies to the browser. Okay, the browser stores the cookies in some storage. Then when forms come back, okay, form data, what also comes back is all the cookie information. And you can access all that cookie information via the $_cookies. So right here, you see it, $_cookies. So it won't be available when you first transmit the page. So in this particular PHP script, the cookie's not available. But when the form gets sent back, any PHP script that's receiving a form will also receive all the cookies associated with your site, and they will be in this $_cookie array. Okay? So in this case, you can see that the first time it's sent, what's going to happen is this entry is not going to be set in the PHP $cookie because the cookie's just being set up. So the first time it's just going to print welcome guest. Thereafter, when this script executes, it will be set and it will welcome whoever the username is or associate it with that username. Okay? So, you've heard a lot of bad things about cookies. This isn't particularly widely used anymore, but I will tell you what the advantages and the disadvantages are. So, advantages. They persist across sessions. Okay, so even if the user closes the web browser, starts it back up, connects to your page again, those cookies are available until their expiration. Also, clients can get a hold of cookies. So JavaScript on the client side can access those cookies, and they can be used with multiple servers. So the thing is, with big server farms like Amazon or eBay, when you don't have one server dedicated to you when you connect to Amazon. Instead, each time you send in a form, it may go to a different server. Okay, so when you're dealing with Amazon or the like, there may be server 1, there may be server 2, there may be server 3, and the issue is each form you send may go to a different server. And with cookies, since they're always sent back with every form, the same cookies are sent back with every form, that cookie information is going to be always available regardless of which server is dealing with it. This will become an issue when we get to session management on the PHP side. But there's a bunch of disadvantages. The big disadvantage is that a lot of people disable them because cookies are used for tracking your behavior. Okay? In fact, when I was going through my cookies for this lecture, I was going, oh my gosh, there was all these things from .add DNX or something. I was like, I can't believe how many cookies I have from these questionable websites. So many users disable them, which mean you can try to set a cookie and the browser will say, not happening. Okay, they can be viewed and hacked by the client. So not only can JavaScript get a hold of those cookies, but JavaScript can monkey with the cookies. So for example, let's say that you set the price. Your price for a car is $30,000. And then you download it to the client and the client changes it to $5 and you accept that cookie when it's sent back as the price of the car. Well, you'll be going out of business very quickly. So you can't trust the cookies that are sent back from the client because they may have been forged or altered. Not in this course you won't. There's a web security course where you probably will learn that. I think it's 466 if I'm not mistaken. But we have a web security course, and yes, I bet you'll be taught how to hack cookies in that course. Okay, and they consume bandwidth because they're always included with the URL sent back to the server. So not only is the form data included with the cookie, but all of the cookie data is included as well. So those are the disadvantages. So cookies aren't all that widely used anymore. Now, a second way of dealing with with session management is hidden form elements. And if you'll notice here, I have such a thing. Input type equals hidden, name equals promotion code. So hidden form elements are form elements that the user can't see. In this case, maybe I'm just trying to track which promotions are being widely used, so I embed this information in the form, send it to the user, but they can't see it. Notice that the input type is still an input form element, so it will be sent back with the promotion code and value pair. Okay, so I'm sending this data to the client and it will come back to me. I use it a lot in Code Assessor. So in CS1, 2 and 140, you may have had to use Code Assessor. I use hidden form elements to transmit information to the browser, such as the point value of a problem or the number of points that you have scored on a problem. And then I use that on the client side to essentially mirror information that's on the server side, because I don't want to have to keep querying the server to find out the point value of a problem. So with hidden form elements, they're accessible by JavaScript, just as your other form elements are. So they have many of the same advantages that cookies have. So the first advantage is they use the client storage rather than your storage. And they can be used with multiple servers because they come back as part of the form data. Just like cookies, they can be used by both the client and the server. In fact, that's what I'm using them for in CS1 or in Code Assessor, is I'm accessing that information. And they're saving me in Code Assessor from having to constantly query the server to retrieve, for example, the point value of a problem, or to figure out how many tries you've already attempted. Plus, unlike cookies, the client can't reject a hidden form element. Okay, so that way you can transmit the information. Client can't reject them. Now, they have the same disadvantages as the cookies. They're insecure. They're actually easier to hack than cookies. Very simple to change the value of a hidden form element. So the best use of them is how I make use of them in Code Assessor, which is for data that is just mirroring data on the server side, in which I don't care whether you hack it or not. If you try to, on the server or client side in Code Assessor, change the point value of the problem, I don't care. You're not affecting anything on the server side. The server still knows when you submit the problem what it's worth. You can hack my hidden form elements on Code Assessor to your heart's content, and all you're diluting is yourself. Okay? You can change the number of points you got on the problem from 20 to 40. Doesn't change anything on the server side, because I don't look at those hidden form elements when they come back. I'm just using it to transmit information to the client that the client can use to avoid requerying the server. Okay? But at any rate, hackers can change them, and they can look at them. Second, they use up the same bandwidth that cookies use because they're transmitted back with your form data. And unlike cookies, they are limited to a single page. Okay, they're limited to the page on which the form data is located. Okay, so they're not persistent the way cookies are. But that is a second way to deal with session management. Now, the third way we deal with session management is probably the most common way when you're dealing with a single server, and that is using PHP session management. Okay? So if you're using PHP session management, you start, let's actually take a look. So you start pretty much every PHP script with this command called session start. And what session start does is it generates a unique session ID. So this generates a unique session ID the first time it's called. Okay, thereafter it returns the session, or thereafter it already knows the session ID. Okay, so that session ID can then be used with something called the $_session table. So normally you don't need to know about the session ID, just that a session ID is being generated and it's very hard to guess. Okay, and you can then store your session information in a $_session array. And it's again key value pairs, just like cookies. When the script exits, this information is not lost. Instead, it's cached on the server, and it can be accessed the next time, again, when you call session start. So how does that work? Well, the way it works is the session ID is sent as a cookie. So the first thing PHP tries to do is send the session ID as a cookie. And then every time form data is sent back, that session ID is sent back with the form data. PHP, when session start is called, then uses that session ID to go into its cache and retrieve all the information associated with this _session table. Now, you're saying, but wait a minute, Brad, you just said most browsers reject cookies. So this seems like we're at an impasse. Well, The second thing, the fallback position for PHP, is that if you have enabled PHP with certain attributes, which is what our lab staff has done, then PHP will add to every link and every form this information. Session ID equals whatever that session ID is. Okay, so for every link that can get clicked and for all your form data, it ensures that this is added to the link so that when it gets transmitted, this is included as part of the information coming back. So then PHP can still look up the session ID. If your PHP has not been configured with that, then you have to go ahead and do it yourself. I think I have it here, so let's see. Yep, so your PHP, this would be your IT staff doing it, but there's enable trans ID and enable track bars, and then PHP will automatically change your links to have the session ID at the end of it. If it's not been configured with those two flags, you have to do it yourself, which is a royal pain in the neck. So you can get at your session ID with the session ID function call, and then you would have to attach it to every link manually, just like I've done here, which hopefully you never have to do. Okay? So, just to take a look at what a session ID looks like, let's do you're kidding me. That's not what I want. Is it fade color? Okay, sorry, I have to go. Oh, I know what it is. Sorry. That it? No, is this it? There we go. Okay, so I picked my toppings, my favorite color, orange. And right now you can see I have no cookies. Current cookies. Whoops, that's not what I wanted. It's not what I wanted either. There we go. Favorite color, orange. Show top 10. Nothing yet in my cookies. But you can see that I already have a session ID. Good luck guessing that. So even if you could alter that cookie, what are the chances that you're going to get someone else's session ID? So the whole idea with generating a string like that is any hacker trying to modify the cookie is very unlikely to hit on your session ID. Actually, I'm sorry, this is the current session ID. Same thing, it's there or here. And now, when I call send form, favorite color equals orange, but when I come back, reload this form, come on. It's supposed to be, there we go. Now, favorite color is orange. So I have in my cookies, orange. Okay. So, quick review. If you want to use PHP session management, you start with session start at the top of your script. If it has not yet generated a session ID, it does so. And it also generates an empty array for $_session. Thereafter, when you call session start, it returns, it creates this session array from cache memory on the server. Okay, then you can access it. You can assign new new key value pairs to it, and when the script ends, it will be written back out to cache. Okay, you typically don't need to destroy your session information, but if you want to, you empty the array by assigning a new empty array to it and then call session destroy. But typically you just you don't worry about that. It should just get collected normally. Let's see. Was I going to? Okay, so as an example use of the session mechanism, here is, that's not it. Okay, here's pizza. I'm going to collect a couple, enter a favorite color. This time I'll say purple. Show top 20. I'll send the form. It says you asked for the following pizza toppings, and then it presses to reconfirm, and it confirms it. If we go and look at what's going on at these files, let's see. That's not what I wanted. Okay, so initially, the action was to call pizza session.pht, method equals get. So then when pizza session gets called, wait a minute. Okay, you see I call session start, then immediately I transfer from the form data into my session array, all of the information from the form data. So that's part of the PHP. Then I generate the HTML follow-up form that says you asked for the following pizza toppings. It asks for reconfirmation with the submit. And you see the action now is pizza session 1.php. And then PHP pizza session 1 calls pizza session start again, and now I'm iterating through the session variables because I no longer have the form data I originally had. Now I have to go through the session table to get the toppings that were requested. So this is kind of like the shopping cart example. If I had a shopping cart, I transfer all the information into the $_session variable. Thereafter, I could get at the shopping cart through my _session array. So this is the most common way you deal with session information in PHP. But as with everything else, there's advantages and disadvantages. So the data is more secure. The advantages is the data is more secure because it's on the client side, on the server side. So the client side can't get access to it. They can't access it. It consumes less bandwidth because you're not always transmitting the cookies back. Remember, with cookies or hidden form elements, you always transmit that information back to the server, so it consumes less bandwidth. The size of the data is determined by the server, not the browser size limitation, so you're not in any way limited in storage, and it's very simple. The disadvantage, and it's a big one, it only works with a single server because every server caches the information on that server. So if you have an Amazon-like server farm, it doesn't work. You can't use the session management with multiple servers because you can't guarantee that the same server will always be managing the session. So the big disadvantage of PHP session management, it only works on a single server. Remember, with cookies and hidden form elements, I was saying they work with multiple, yes, they both work with multiple servers because that information always comes back with the form data. But that's not true when you're using session management. The session management is cached on each server. So another server can't access it. So to get around that problem, you can use, okay, the second disadvantage, which isn't a big one, is that the data is not available on the client side. Now in Code Assessor, that was a problem where I sometimes was having to query the database in order to get the number of points associated with a problem, the number of attempts associated with the user, and so I eventually was transmitting that information to the client using hidden form elements. So that is a disadvantage. It's not a big disadvantage. Okay, so if you have multiple servers, you have to use a database in order to do session management. And the way it works is you store the information yourself. That is, I'm sure there's PHP libraries now that help, but I've always done it myself. So I just store the information for a session into a database, and as the key, I use the session ID. So the session ID is always available to you. You can get it through that session ID function call. It comes back, you use that as a key into a relation, you store your session information associated, that's the primary key, so this becomes the primary key, and that stores all of your session information, which you presumably would store as key value pairs. So it would probably, in the relational database, it would look something like session ID, then the attribute, it'd probably be like key and value. So this would be the key name, like maybe user, or I'm sorry, dknuth. No, key name would be username. Value might be dknuth. This would be your session ID, something, something, something. Actually, the primary key is going to be the session ID and the key value, the key. Okay, so that way any server can access the database. Okay, the disadvantage, of course, is you generally have to roll your own, and so it has all the advantages that session stuff has, which is the data is more secure, less bandwidth because the data is on the server. You're not constrained by the size of the client's storage. And the fourth advantage, you can use it with multiple servers since each server can get access to the session ID. So the first three advantages are the same as the first three advantages for PHP session management. The fourth advantage is that you can use it with multiple servers. The disadvantage is complicated. You have to implement it yourself as the server-side programmer. Of course, if you're using multiple servers, you're probably a big company like Amazon or eBay, so you can afford the resources. So questions about session management. Okay, a quick review. The whole reason we're concerned about session management is because state information is ordinarily lost as soon as the PHP script associated with a form terminates. So going back to this example, as soon as the PHP script associated with form 1 terminates, normally all that session information disappears. We want to maintain it. We have to use one of the 4 versions of session management we've talked about. Cookies, hidden form elements, PHP session management, or DB session management. So that's why we're so concerned with session management today. Okay, last thing I wanted to talk about. So we've talked about forms and submitting form data and how to access it using the _post and _get. We've talked about session management. The last thing I want to talk about is how we guard against malicious hacking. Okay, so there's something called cross-site attacks, hacking attacks. Okay, so, whoops, that's not what I want. Don't want my mail. So going back here, edit, nope. Okay, cross-site scripting attacks, XXS. Again, we're not going to be too concerned about them in this course. I just want to introduce them. The web security course would get into it in more detail. So suppose that you are a malicious hacker and you want to trick a user into downloading a virus or malware onto your onto their computer. So one way you might do that is you might, through a form, submit a link that looks like this. So onClick document.location.href equal, and it redirects. So this is a redirect. We'll get to that when we get to JavaScript, but basically href controls what site the web page is oriented to, directed to. So we're redirecting your browser to downloadvirus.com. Look at the name that I'm giving to the link, sort posts by date. So maybe this is a blog site or a forum, and you see that link and you think, oh, if I click on it, it's going to sort the posts by date. Nope, it's going to cause you to point your browser to the site and start downloading malware. And you're thinking, well, how does the hacker get this onto my form? How does it get this link onto the user form? So maybe this is, like I say, a blog form or something. So there's a place for the hacker, for the user to enter their post. So they literally enter this into the form, into the text box. So if you simply upload this and then download this onto everyone's web page, it will show up just like this, and the user can be suckered into clicking on this link and being redirected to the site, which is bad. Okay? So what you want to do is you want to scrub this kind of stuff. So typically, you want to scrub form data to eliminate tags like this. So you don't want them to be able, you somehow have to defang this. And PHP provides a way to do that. So PHP has a number of commands. One of them is the HTML entities command. And what it does is it replaces every HTML entity, like less than sign is an HTML entity, greater than sign is an HTML entity, the ampersand is an HTML entity. It will replace all of those things with their corresponding HTML entity codes. So in HTML, you can use what are called entity codes. They start with an ampersand and they end with a semicolon. And in between is the name of the entity code. So ampersand amp will generate an ampersand sign. Ampersand LT semicolon will generate a less than sign. Ampersand quote colon generates a double quote. So these are all entity codes. You could also give the comparable numeric codes, but it's generally easier to give these codes instead. So if I do that, let's just show you what happens. So I'm going to call it scrub.php. Going to give it a bad line, so href equals download virus.com and click here. Now I'm going to echo out HTML entities, $A. Okay, and unexpected, what did I do wrong? That's what I did wrong. Terminated it. See what the less than sign was replaced with a ampersand less than. Over here, same thing, ampersand less than, an ampersand greater than. So what it's done is replace the HTML markup with their entity codes. So now when I display that, let's see if that, let's actually do this now. Let's take this PHP program, scrub.php, and send it over to okay, and I'll run it over there. Okay, and now it's very clear that, so this is no longer a link, right? It's not showing up as a link. It's actually showing up, the user can see that someone was trying to trick them. So when it shows up, the ampersand less than was replaced with a less than sign, but it's no longer treated anymore as an HTML link. Whereas if I had simply, let's log in there, if I had simply echoed it out without the entities, now watch what happens. Goes from this, let's get rid of that. Now it says click here. Okay? So that's why you use the HTML entities, because it gets rid of those dangerous command or those dangerous tags, and it stops those cross-site scripting attacks. Okay? If you need to restore those tags, you can do it with HTML entity decode, which replaces all of the ampersand escaped entities with their HTML equivalent. So I have to do that in Code Assessor, because when it comes in, I need, if the code is like A less than B, I don't want to see it coming in as A ampersand LT B. I really want it to come in as A less than B. So I actually use the decode entities to convert entity codes back into these tags. Okay? Now, the second and last thing is you also see add slashes and strip slashes. Okay? And what add slashes does is it adds slashes to a single quote, a double quote, and the backslash. And that's important not for cross-site scripting attacks, but to stop things from messing up your SQL queries. Okay, so let me quickly, this is the last thing. Strip. Yeah, shoot, is it not in here? No, of course not. There we go. Okay, so let's say that I did a query where I say insert into code values and I say $get code. So this is in fact what I do with with the code assessor site is I get your code and I try to insert it into the code relation. Okay? Well, what happens if you have quotes in your code, which you do if you have strings? What do you think happens if code contains a quote? The value contains a quote. What can happen? Let's say the code comes in, the code looks like $, let's say it's A equals Brad, like that. Remember, this is interpolating. Yes, what could happen? Yes, so right here, that first quote closes off this insert. So this insert is now ending with this $A equals, which in this case would cause a PHP syntax error because it's not properly closed. This gentleman suggests if the rest of the string includes some nice other SQL commands, so first of all it closes it. Let's say instead it said $A equals $, or just double quotes, and then it ends it, and then it says delete, or drop table rather, drop table code. I am not going to be a happy camper because the hacker now has managed to destroy my code table. So what add slashes does is it would add a backslash so that instead of it being A equals whatever that thing was, the drop table code, it would now come in as backslash in front of the quotes, and that would defang it again. Now SQL knows that the quotes are part of the string. They're not meant to terminate the string. So you would store it this way into the database. Now when it comes out of the database, you don't want to show these backslash quotes to the user, so you would call strip slashes to strip the slashes. So before you stored the string into the database, you would call add slashes right here to add slashes to your quotes and single quotes. You would store that string into your database. Then when you retrieve it from the database, you call strip slashes to get rid of those slashes and return it to the user. And that heads off any kind of scripting attack against your database, plus more innocuous syntax errors that get caused when the string is prematurely closed with a quote. Okay? So before you take the quiz today, I strongly suggest that you just do go through this handling forms because I've gone pretty quickly through a lot of material. So before you attempt today's quiz, I definitely suggest that you look at the handling forms. Perhaps also check the videotape from today because the stuff on database management and hidden forms wasn't in the notes. Okay, so before taking the quiz, make sure you've just quickly reviewed this particular link, and also you've reviewed the stuff that I talked about with hidden forms and database management. With that, I will see you on Thursday, where we will talk about the PHP connection to SQL and regular expressions.
This is what I had a question about. Do you mind if I write on the board?
Go right ahead.